Well, good evening and welcome once again to Trinity's Bible study, and a very warm welcome if you're joining us online. I pray that God would bless you through this evening's word. Now, if you remember last week, we were talking about the prophecy which said Tyre was going to be destroyed completely. And we were reading about the effects of that would have on the cities around them. By the way, if you'd want to know where we are, I do apologize. We're starting chapter 27 this evening. Ezekiel chapter 27. And we're still on the subject of Tyre and this prophecy. And I'm going to read the first 11 verses. It's quite a long one, so bear with me. The word of the Lord came to me. Son of man, take up a lament concerning Tyre. Say to Tyre, situated at the gateway to the sea, merchant of the peoples on many coasts, this is what the sovereign Lord says. You say, O Tyre, I am perfect in beauty. Your domain was on the high seas. Your builders brought your beauty to perfection. They made all your timbers of pine trees from Senir. They took cedar from Lebanon to make a mast for you. Of oaks from Bashan they made your oars. Of cypress wood from the coasts of Cyprus they made your deck, inlaid with ivory. Fine embroidered linen from Egypt was your sail and served as your banner. Your awnings were of blue and purple from the coasts of Elisha. Men of Sidon and Arvad were your oarsmen. Your skilled men, O Tyre, were aboard as your seamen. Veteran craftsmen of Gebal were on board as shipwrights to caulk your seams. All the ships of the sea and their sailors came alongside to trade for your wares. Men of Persia, Lydia, and Put served as soldiers in your army. They hung their shields and helmets on your walls, bringing you splendor. Men of Arvad and Helek were manned on your walls on every side. Men of Gamad were in your towers. They hung their shields around your walls. They brought your beauty to perfection. So last week we saw how the people around Tyre were taking up a lament for the city after its destruction. And now we see God telling Ezekiel to take up a lament for Tyre. Even though at the time this city is still at the height of its prosperity and success, and there appears to be no sign of its demise, God tells Ezekiel to take up this lament for Tyre. And John Gill puts it like this: Now, thou son of man, take up a lament for Tyre. Compose an elegy and sing it. Make a mournful noise and deliver out a funeral ditty, such as the mournful women made at funerals, in which they all said they all said what they could in praise of the dead, and made very doleful lamentations for them. This the prophet was to do in a prophetic manner for the confirmation of what was prophesied by him. If you like, I like to think of it like this: God is asking Ezekiel to do some acting again, to reinforce the message in the prophecy that he's given regarding Tyre. And I can't remember the figures, but when I did my first aid instructor's course with the ambulance service, they did tell me that you retain so much of what you read and so much of what you hear and more of what you see. So, God is giving him this message, and then just to make sure they get it, he's having acting as well to go with it. So they're hearing the word, they're seeing it acted out. It's reinforcing what God wants them to know. Whether they take any notice of it is another matter, mind, but God has instructed. And remember, at the start of this book, Ezekiel was told that it's not his job to worry about whether they listen or not. His job is just to do what God tells him to do and deliver these prophecies and leave the rest to him. Now this is the second of 3 laments that we're going to be reading about in chapters 26, 27 and 28. Now the opening line of this lament tells us that the city had a very high impression of themselves. We read of them saying about themselves, "I am perfect in beauty." Now that smacks of pride to start off with. And we all know what happens to proud people. And thanks to this prophecy that Ezekiel has given, if they're listening, they know what's going to happen to them.
Steve, it's what they said about Satan.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely right. Yep. Now we also see another analogy coming here, if you like. And when we get to verse 4, we start to read of a ship being built. Its timbers and its masts and all that. And it makes a point of telling us that this was built of the finest materials. And we've all heard of a lot of these things from other places in the Bible, mostly from when David and Solomon were building the temple and all that. Exceptionally good wood, the pine trees from Lebanon, the cedar which they took from Bashan, the oak trees which they took from Cyprus, etc., etc. And as well as talking about this ship, which incidentally the ship is an analogy for the city of Tyre, we talk about the finest oarsmen, the very best around, skilled shipwrights who are on board to keep the ship safe and caulk seams so that it doesn't leak. And these represent all the skilled people who are necessary to keep a city in good running order. The people, if you like, who work behind the scenes. The unnoticed people, the unthanked people very often, but nonetheless expert craftsmen in their own fields. And we also read of embroidered linen and materials made of purple and blue, and incidentally purple and blue were often colours chosen by royalty. And a sail made from embroidered Egyptian linen. And the word put in there actually, translated as sail, is ness. And this kind of denotes a standard or a flag which was raised on a hill around which troops were rallied. In the British Army, we used to call them the colours. And you stand there and plant the colours in the ground and the troops rally around the colours. That's the impression that this word gives. The sail is, if you like, the standard of the city. And it served another purpose, and not always for the best either. I know from being in the army that the colours invoke a sense of self-assurance and pride in you. When you're standing next to the colours of your regiment, there's definitely a sense of pride in it. And in this case, that sense of pride is probably not a good thing, because it's what's fueling the fire that is making God angry, if I can put it like that. So, we've got this analogy of the ship, which represents the city, being built of the best materials by the best craftsmen possible. They've got a wonderful ship, stroke city, and they're not shy in telling everybody about it either. They're not shy in telling everybody about how they feel about themselves, how marvellous they are, how wonderful they are, how the world should look up to them. In verse 10, we see them boasting of their military strength, as the men defending them were well known for their fighting prowess. And again here I'm going to quote John Gill. As the Tyrians were a trading people, they hired foreign troops into their service to fill their garrisons, to defend their city and fight for them in time of war. And these were of various nations, and the most famous for military skill and valour, as the Persians, a people well known and famous for war in the times of Cyrus and before, well skilled in shooting arrows, and they of Lud, or the Lydians, a people in Greece renowned for war, in the times before Croesus their king, as well as in his time, and they of Put, the Libyans, a people in Africa skillful in drawing a bow. So that's given us a kind of impression as to what these men were like. They were, to use a phrase from David, mighty warriors. They were skilled fighters. And it was a common thing back in those days for kings to hire in mercenaries to help defend their city. So they're not, Tyre is not here doing anything that everybody else hasn't already done. The thing is, they're boasting about it. Again, it's up there. Look at us. We've got a fantastic army. They can defend us. They can protect us against anything. Now, shields and helmets hang on the wall. This is usually only done in times of peace or when the soldiers are resting and not on duty. And this, to me, speaks again of their arrogance because of the confidence they had that their city was impregnable and well defended. And all this that we're reading about, the fine ship, the fine materials, the best craftsmen, the best silk and the finest colours, all intended to illustrate the beauty and majesty and the strength of this city as seen through their own eyes. And God is intending through this prophecy to highlight their attitude of pride and arrogance. Okay, I'm going to read now from 12 to 24. Again, it's another long passage, so please bear with me. Tarshish did business with you because of your great wealth of goods. They exchanged silver, iron, tin, and lead for your merchandise. Greece, Tubal, and Meshach traded with you. They exchanged slaves and articles of bronze for your wares. Men of Beth Togarmah exchanged workhorses, war horses, and mules for your merchandise. The men of Rhodes traded with you, and many coastlands were your customers. They paid you with ivory, tusks, and ebony. Aram did business with you because of your many products. They exchanged turquoise, purple fabric, embroidered work, fine linen, coral, and rubies for your merchandise. Judah and Israel traded with you. They exchanged wheat from Minnith and confections, honey, oil, and balm for your wares. Damascus, because of your many products and great wealth of goods, did business with you in wine from Helbon and wool from Zahar. Danites and Greeks from Uzal bought your merchandise. They exchanged wrought iron, cassia, and calmus for your wares. Dedan traded in saddle blankets with you. Arabia and all the princes of Kedar were your customers. They did business with you in lamb, rams, and goats. The merchants of Sheba and Ramah traded with you. For your merchandise, they exchanged the finest of all kinds of spices and precious stones and gold. Haran, Caneh, and Eden, and merchants of Sheba, Asher, and Kilmad traded with you. In your marketplace, they traded with you beautiful garments, blue fabric, embroidered work, and multicolored rugs with cords twisted and tightly knotted. That's quite a list, isn't it? Really? Absolutely. These verses are dedicated to giving you in more detail the extent of Tyre's trading influence, the extent of their, if you like, influence in the trading world. It is massive. And Ezekiel here gives quite a list of different countries that are traded with Tyre, together with the commodity and goods they traded. And I'm just going to narrow it down a bit now and cut some of the words out and give you an idea of all the goods that are being traded in and out of there. Because we read of silver, iron, tin, and lead coming from Tarshish, slaves and articles of bronze from Greece, Tubal, and Meshach, workhorses, war horses, and mules from Beth Togarmah, ivory, tusks, and ebony from Rhodes, turquoise and purple fabric, embroidered work, fine linen, coral, and rubies from Aram, wheat, confections, honey, oil, and balm from Israel and Judah, wine and wool from Damascus, wrought ironwork, cassia and calmus from the Danites, saddle blankets from Dedan, rams, goats, lambs, and from Arabia, and the finest kinds of spices, precious stones and gold from Sheba and Ramesh. Beautiful garments, blue fabric, embroidered work and multicolored rugs from Haran, Canaan and Eden. That is quite a list. An impressive list of expensive goods from pretty much all over the known world at the time. Now, I've never been there, more's the pity, but those who know Jerusalem tell me that if you go to the old town of Jerusalem and walk through the markets, that gives you some idea of what the city of Tyre might be like. This bustling, multicolored, vibrant city full of stalls and wares and people selling things. It's a vibrant, prosperous city. And if you want to look it up, a map of the times that we're talking about, you can see for yourself that it was quite a commercial empire. It was a vast commercial empire because it covered most of the known world today. And don't forget, the Phoenicians were a good ship, seagoing people. They had good ships, they had good trade links, and the city of Tyre, remember last week we said it was in two parts, the mainland and the island. The island part of the city actually had two very good deep water ports attached to it. So they've got a good seagoing commercial nation for all their links of trade. And of course the reverse is true. Everybody else who's got ships can bring their goods in to this little island, to the ports, and trade their goods. Now, something else to consider when you think about that list of goods and where this list has come from. Don't forget, Ezekiel has given this list as part of the prophecy. Now, as far as we know, has never been to the city of Tyre, because it is quite a long way from where he is, next to the river Kibar. So it's unlikely that Ezekiel has ever been to this city. So this list that he is presented in such accurate detail can only have come from one place, and that is from God. And if you doubt that God ever speaks to people, just let me diverse a minute and tell you a little story. When I was a new Christian, my dad was a vicar of a church up in Pontland-Fryth. We were at a prayer meeting one evening, a worship service. And the way the prayer went back in those days, in the prayer times, you called somebody's name out to be prayed for, and everybody just sort of quietly prayed for them. And at the start of this meeting, I just thought, I'm going to pray for a colleague of mine. He'd just lost his teenage son was dying of cancer. And I thought, I'll pray for this boy, I'll throw his name up. But I'd never done anything like that before, and I didn't speak out. I kept quiet. I'm wrestling with this in my mind. The lady leading it, who was a good friend of mine now, Marion, she said, there's somebody here who wants to pray for somebody. Don't be shy, we're among friends here. I thought she's talking about me. No, I'm not saying anything, I'm too shy. And I never said anything, and the meeting moved on. And afterwards, I went up to her and I said, Marion, you know when you were leading the prayers and you said there's somebody here wants to pray for somebody and don't be embarrassed? She said, yes. I said, that was me you were talking about. She said, yes, I know it was, but I wasn't going to embarrass you by taking your name in front of all these people. And I thought, wow, there's three people who knew, two people, me and God. I never told anybody else, so if she knew, it was because God told her. And this is the situation we're seeing here. Ezekiel has heard all this from God in detail, because if he'd knew people who traded in this city of Tyre, if he'd heard rumours, even from then, there's no way he could have compiled such an accurate list of everything that was being sold and traded in the city. It's just not possible. He would have left something out. And Matthew Henry puts it like this: we have reason to think that Ezekiel knew little of his own knowledge concerning the trade of Tyre. He was a priest, carried away from captivity far enough from the neighbourhood of Tyre, we may suppose, when he was young, and there he had been for 11 years. And yet he speaks of the particular merchandises of Tyre as nicely as if he'd been the controller of the customs house there, by which it appears that he was divinely inspired in what he spoke and wrote. It is God that says this. So don't doubt it, folks. I know most of us here, probably all of us have heard God speak to us. But if you're watching this on the internet and you're fairly new to Christianity, then don't doubt it. God speaks to people today still. And if you'll let yourself open to it, he will certainly speak to you. So, this figure of a ship is... I'm getting ahead of myself there. Okay, let me read verses 25 to 27. The ships of Tarshish serve as carriers for your wares. You are filled with heavy cargo in the heart of the sea. Your oarsmen take you out to the high seas, but the east wind will break you to pieces in the heart of the sea. Your merchandise, wealth and wares, your mariners, seamen and shipwrights, your merchants and all your soldiers and everyone else on board will sink into the heart of the sea on the day of your shipwreck. So I was getting ahead of myself then, I got so excited. So once again in verse 27 we're seeing this figure of speech of the city as a ship being brought up again by Ezekiel. And the ship we're given, the impression we're given is of a ship that is heavily laden, possibly overloaded, and sailing into deep waters. And when we've heard of that list of goods that are being traded in and out of Tyre, it's not too difficult to compare the city of Tyre to an overloaded ship, because there was tons going on there. And this ship that Ezekiel is talking about represents the city of Tyre at the height of its success, loaded with goods of all kinds, with all the people needed on board to keep it going. And we're told that this ship is being steered out, if you like, rowed out into deep waters by the oarsmen. And just a point here, the oarsmen that he's speaking about represent the city officials, the people who are guiding this city and leading it in its commercial activities. Benson puts it like this: the prophet here begins to change the subject, and now, in metaphorical language, speaks of the danger into which the rulers and statesmen of Tyre had brought her by their pride and ill-concerted measures. He compares her to a ship impelled by its own rowers into a very tempestuous sea. Great troubles are frequently signified by great waters. In this case, the great trouble meant war with the Chaldeans. And Matthew Henry puts it like this: the governors of the city and those that had management of their public affairs, by some mismanagement or other, involved them in a war with the Chaldeans, which was the ruin of their state. By their insolence, by some affront given to the Chaldeans, or some attempt made upon them, in confidence of their own ability to contend with them, they provoked Nebuchadnezzar to make a descent upon them, and by their obstinacy in standing it out to the last, enraged him to such a degree that he determined on the ruin of their state. So this analogy now is, we can see the city is heading for disaster. God is saying through Ezekiel, this ship is heading into deep waters, it's heading into trouble. Ergo, the city which the ship represents is headed into trouble. We read that the east wind has broken thee. Now, those who know that area will probably know this, but the east wind out there was well known to sailors for its destructive power. In the Palestine area, the east wind is characterized by continued gusts, and if it rises to a tempest, it generally causes great damage on account of the violence of these gusts. So when you speak about the east wind out there, they would have known exactly what you were talking about. But the east wind is also mentioned a few other times in the Bible. The authorized King James Version of the Bible in the Old Testament makes some 17 references to the east wind. Chapter 24 of Genesis, the Pharaoh's dream, which is interpreted by Joseph, describes 7 years of grain blasted by the east wind. In chapters 10 and 14 of Exodus, Moses summons the east wind to bring the locusts that plague Egypt and to part the Red Sea so that the Israelites can escape Pharaoh's army. And those are just two. There's plenty of others if you want to look them up. And several of these references exist. Most of them are associating the east wind with destruction.
Yeah, Steve, can I just say, Sharon and I once heard a really interesting sermon about the north wind, the south wind, the west wind, and the east wind. And they have prophetic meaning with one is peace, one is, and the east wind is always judgment.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so even though we struggle sometimes to get hold of this, the people that Ezekiel is talking to would have known very well what Ezekiel was referring to. If you want to read a reference of the east wind and destruction, look up Psalm 48, verse 7. Talks about you destroyed them like ships of Tarshish, shattered by an east wind. So in this case, the east wind is another simile or analogy, if you like. It signifies the multitudes of armies that are coming from the east against this city. I guess Ezekiel could have said, as if he paraphrased it, as the violence of the east wind occasions on many times shipwrecks in the sea, so the army of your enemies coming upon you will ruin your strength and glory and leave you like a wreck cast upon the shore. That's the simile that is being put across by this east wind. These armies are coming against you. We've already heard that the city stroke the ship is headed into trouble into deep waters, and it's the east wind that's driving them there. Well, these armies are coming against the city. And it's not going to be pretty. You know, if you think of all the empires in the world that we've ever seen, the Roman Empire, the Phoenicians, the Greeks, the Persians, the Babylonians, the British Empire, if you like, all of these empires have got their start, they've got their period of glory, and a slow decline to the end, where it wanes. It's like a day, if you like. They've got their dawn, and it works all the way through until it comes to sunset and the empire dies. Every one of them except Tyre, because their destruction is going to be sudden. It's like their sun going out at midday. Do you know God can't make it any plainer sometimes, can he? You know, all we've got to do is listen. And that, I'm afraid, is what human beings are not terribly good at, listening.
That's why he gave us 2 years.
Exactly, and only one mouth. Yes, and I got to be honest, sometimes God's had to get the megaphone out to grab my attention as well, so. Okay, let's pick up verses 28 to 32. The shorelands will quake when your seamen cry out. All who handled the oars will abandon their ships. The mariners and all the seamen will stand on the shore. They will raise their voice and cry bitterly over you. They will sprinkle dust on their heads and roll in ashes. They will shave their heads because of you and will put on sackcloth. They will weep over you with anguish of soul and with bitter mourning. As they wail and mourn over you, they will take up a lament concerning you. Who was ever silenced like Tyre, surrounded by the seas? When your merchandise went out on the sea, you satisfied many nations with your great wealth and your wares. You enriched the kings of the earth. Okay. I'm just going to compare a few translations of that one verse 28. New International Version, we've just read, when the shorelands quake and when your seamen cry out. King James Version says, when the suburbs shall shake at the sound of your cry of the pilots. The American Standard Version reads, at the sound of the cry of your pilots, the suburbs will shake. The Bible in Basic English reads, at the sound of your cry of your ships, guides, the boards of the ship will be shaken. And the Complete Jewish Bible says, when they hear the cries of your pilots, the mainland coasts will tremble. Now, although there doesn't actually appear to be any definite consensus to which translation is the most accurate, in a way, it doesn't matter. Like we've said before with some of these translation issues, it's not actually what they say, it's the message they're trying to get across that's important. And this is one of those occasions, because if you read them all together and take the general gist of all of them, the message the author is trying to get across is that the fallout from the destruction of Tyre is going to be massive. It is going to extend a long way. It'll be felt far and wide. We read of sailing men leaving their ships and standing on the shore, loudly mourning the destruction of Tyre. That, I would imagine, is probably the ships that are anchored around various places, and the seamen leaving their ships to stand on the shore, listening to the news, or watching it if they're close enough, in unbelief. We read of all the traditional signs of mourning, going bald, putting ashes on yourself, sackcloth, all the rest of it. That indicates some serious mourning going on over the loss of this city. All over the world, a lament rose because of the loss of this ship, or the city of Tyre. The countryside around it is going to quake in fear. International shipping is going to come to a halt. Tough sailors around the world are going to be distraught. Tyre's clients are all going to be confused, their trading partners. Commerce is disrupted. The inhabitants of all the coastlands around are going to be appalled at the destruction of this city. And kings are going to be afraid and troubled because of what they hear. Daniel Block, who's a 20th century Bible scholar, puts it like this: the people on the mainland are aghast, and the sailors on board other ships are horrified at the sinking of this Tyrian Titanic. Lesser vessels might be expected to perish in a Mediterranean squall, but surely not this proud monarch of the seas. I think that makes it all the more shocking, if you like, the fact that this is such a big, well-known trading centre, so powerful, and it suddenly comes to this complete and utter demise. It might not have been so traumatic if it had been a slow demise, but it's fairly quick, and it's so complete, as we read last week or the week before, about the city being destroyed, the land bit of it, and all the rubble thrown into the sea. It's left a bare rock, so bare that archaeologists today can't pinpoint exactly where the city was. So it's not hard to imagine the fallout from the destruction of this once mighty, powerful city. Verses 33 to the end of the chapter. When your merchandise went out on the sea, you satisfied many nations with your great wealth and your wares. You enriched the kings of the earth. Now you are shattered by the sea, in the depths of the water. Your wares and all your company have gone down with you. All who live in the coastlands are appalled at you. Their kings shudder with horror. Their faces are distorted with fear. The merchants among the nations hiss at you. You have come to a horrible end and will be no more. I don't want to be on the wrong end of a prophecy like that from God. No, please, God, don't let me come to a horrible end like that. These verses sum up briefly Tyre's demise, if you like, in a nutshell. Starting with how she supplied the needs of all the worlds, the kings and all the countries. And going on to liken her to this ship which is wrecked with all her goods and all hands on board lost. And ending with the merchants hissing at them. Now, regarding the hissing, is that the time already? Matthew Poole puts it like this: hiss is usually an expression of scorn and contempt poured forth on the person being hissed at. If thus understood, the meaning is that there should be some among Tyre's customers that would rejoice at her fall and flout at her, either perhaps wronged by her in their trade, or else with envy and expectation of her trade would turn to them. Now, we've heard that before, haven't we? Exactly why nations are being punished for laughing at Jerusalem's fall. and hoping that the trade would come in their direction. And so we're hearing now that perhaps not everybody is sorry to see Tyre go. Perhaps there are people there who've been wronged, who felt cheated or robbed, and are glad to see it go, and they're hissing at them and making no secret of the fact that they're glad to see the city go down. But hey, that's human nature, isn't it? It goes on today as well, you know. Not everybody's going to be upset by something. There will be people who will laugh and rejoice at it. But you know, there's a message in there for us today. Incidentally, Daniel Block says, in her apparent invincibility, Tyre represented the glory of human achievement. Because her successes were driven by avarice and pursued in defiance of God, however, she could not stand. The Lord of history always has the last word. And the message that we need to pull out of that is that riches without God are unable to satisfy the hearts of men. And often they keep many from dependence upon God. And Kenneth Feinberg, who was a Bible scholar, comments, has this not invaded the church? This spirit has not invaded the church and in the lives of many Christians. And unfortunately, he's right. This business of possessions has filtered into parts of the church, sadly. Heinrich Meyer, another Bible scholar, says, what a powerful conception of the great ship sinking in silence with all on board. One cry, the waves meet over her, and only a floating spar tells where she sank. O mariner, see to it that Christ is on board, for only he can still the tempest and speak peace and guide thee out of the great waters. And the whole of this chapter, and I'll finish with this, the whole of this chapter 27 is summed up nicely by the Bridgeway Study Bible, which reads this. This chapter continues the theme of Tyre's overflow. It is in the form of a funeral song that Tyre's trading partners sing as they mourn the city's death. The song begins by recalling the glory of Tyre's past. The prosperous commercial city is likened to the magnificent merchant ship, beautifully made from the best quality materials taken from all parts of the trading world. Her planks, masts, oars, and decking were made of the best timbers. Her sails from the finest linen, her colours of the most expensive dyes. The oarsmen, sailors, and craftsmen who made up her crew were highly skilled men drawn from many countries. Tyre's prosperity appeared to be secure, for the city was well defended by an army of hired soldiers, specially chosen from many countries. The city's commercial strength was unequalled. Countries from the west to the east, from the north to the south, traded with Tyre. The trade covered an enormous range of merchandise, from minerals to animals, from spices to slaves. However, Tyre's great commercial enterprise brought with it a great danger. The ship became overloaded, and when caught in a storm at sea, it sank. All its merchandise was lost, and its crew drowned. All Tyre's trading partners now mourn its loss, although their mourning is as much out of pity for themselves as out of pity for Tyre. You know, they're not sorry that Tyre's gone, they're sorry they've lost their source of income. And again, nothing ever changes. Still the same goes on today, you know. But as we look at this, there's messages in there for us to take away from this, about pride particularly, and about greed. God has got nothing against people being rich and having lots of fine things. He blesses people, but he has got something against you making them their God, against you being proud of what you've got instead of being thankful to the one who gave it to us. And I'll end it there for tonight. Yes, yes.